Are there risks with attempting to make contact with non-human intelligences when all you know for certain is that they exist and that they are here? That is what we are going to explore in this video. CE-5 stands for Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, and according to contact expert James Ian Doley, it can be defined as human-initiated contact with UFO intelligence. I think UFO intelligence is a very good way to put it, because while we may be suspect that UFOs come from other star systems, or we may be convinced that they come from other dimensions, we ultimately don't know with any certainty where they originate from. So calling it UFO intelligence is a great catch-all phrase that allows UFOs and acknowledges that UFOs could come from absolutely anywhere, other dimensions. It could be a civilization on our Earth that has figured out a way to conceal itself from human detection. It could come from other dimensions. It could come from other times. There's no limitation to where UFOs could potentially come from. But I think we would all concur that UFOs stem from an intelligence and are directed by some kind of intelligence, hence UFO intelligence. In line with not knowing where UFOs originate, here's a very insightful quote by Luis Elizondo. UAPs are perhaps the greatest enigma we face in our modern times. As such, it is imperative we approach this issue with objectivity and open-mindedness in order that we don't prematurely rule out a possible origin. Ultimately, this mystery may not have an either-or answer and may truly be far more bizarre than we ever thought possible. Before I go any further, I have no choice but to emphasize that CE-5, the attempt to make contact with non-human intelligences, has been around long before Dr. Stephen Greer ever came onto the stage. So by no means is it mandatory to associate CE-5 with Dr. Stephen Greer or any of his philosophies, period. Since we don't really know what UFOs are, and we don't know what the intelligence is that directs these craft, how can we possibly have any hope of ascertaining the risks involved with making contact with this intelligence? And really, I think the only hope to get anywhere within that arena is to look back at the many decades of reported experiences people have had with UFO intelligence. Before we progress with this video, I want to go over a very insightful sentiment that author and producer Bryce Zabel has shared many times. He basically says this: there is one thing that humanity, or world governments if you will, and the others, or this non-human intelligence, has in common. And that is, both world governments and both the others, the non-human intelligence, want to keep UAP presence, UAP reality, a secret. And the way we know this with certainty is because if humanity or world governments wanted to eradicate the secrecy behind UAP reality, they could do it in an afternoon. They could hold a press conference, and the Pentagon could broadcast all of its best evidence of UAP incursions, and they could get all of their experts and their generals that are in the know to talk about it live on air. US government doesn't do that. Other governments likewise do not do that. In that same vein, if the others, or this non-human intelligence, whatever you want to call it, if they wanted to completely eradicate the secrecy that envelops our world regarding the presence of UAP, they could do it likewise in an afternoon. They could land on the proverbial White House lawn. They could fly over the Super Bowl. They could just one afternoon fly over any city with very large craft, making a spectacle and everyone with phone cameras and news crews could be out there, and it could all be recorded. And so humanity world governments particularly, and this non-human intelligence are both in alignment with keeping it a secret. We are dealing with an intelligence that is highly covert. They don't have transponders. When they do incursions into highly restricted military airspace, they don't get on the radio band and communicate to the control towers, telling the people at the control towers who they are, where they come from, or what their intentions are. They do make themselves seen and known on a limited basis, but not to the extent where world institutions accept their presence, or much of world governments for that matter. Most of the high-level evidence, or at least the evidence that would have any influence upon the world, is within the hands of governments. A very quick example would be the evidence that was attained during the USS Nimitz UFO event series of 2004. The military veterans on the Nimitz and on the Princeton and the Aviators are all pretty vocal that there's longer video, there is higher resolution video, that the radar returns exist, but they were confiscated. The data is on this planet. So the way this UFO intelligence interacts with this world facilitates the cover-up and is highly covert. So the question arises, do you really want to make your presence obvious to an intelligence that visits our world or is part of our world and is so covert in nature? In other words, the covert nature of this intelligence at the very minimum should lead us to have some pause when considering the proposition of going out into the field and trying to make contact with the very intelligence that is unwilling to make itself known in a overt fashion. Here's an excerpt from Robert Hastings from the book Confession: Our Hidden Alien Encounters Revealed, in which he characterizes his contact experiences. I never anticipated this situation and regret that it entered my life, especially the encounters that apparently involved my being unwillingly taken aboard craft commonly called UFOs. I do not know whether these entities are from other worlds, in our universe, multiverse, or from another dimension of reality, but I do know that my experiences were physically real, not psychological fantasies, and sometimes involved other hapless humans who were with me at the time. Going forward, I'm going to use the word commandeer for someone who has been taken against their will from a non-human intelligence. And those people are going to be known as commandeerees. The reason I'm not going to use the classical word that starts with an A that's common within UFO literature is because YouTube does not like that word, and if I use that word, they might suppress this video, so I'm going to avoid that. So anyways, in line with the covert nature of the UFO presence, here Robert Hastings explains how those that have been commandeered, that is, snatched by UFO intelligence, often cannot remember very much regarding what transpired while they were snatched and or while their consciousness was commandeered, and that is by design. In any case, as you read the following chapters, if it seems that I am at a loss to explain most of what went on during my encounters, please remember that this appears to be the nature of the game. The entities, who seemingly have the ability to significantly manipulate the human mind, are firmly in control. For whatever reason, they wish to limit the amount of information that their human captives retain regarding their interactions with them. Perhaps this is designed to mask the aliens' operations, or perhaps it is a merciful nod to the humans they take who might be perpetually traumatized if they were able to clearly, fully recall all that has befallen them and will likely befall them again and again in the future. Or perhaps both factors are in play. Regardless, with rare exceptions, anyone who wishes to comprehensively recount his/her commandeering experiences will seemingly be unable to do so, even when utilizing hypnotically induced recall. Now, Robert Hastings recalls having unwanted, uninitiated contact with UFO intelligence going all the way back to when he was just 2 years old. But what if an encounter with non-human intelligence could somehow trigger future interactions with UFO intelligence that are undesirable and unsolicited? Well, frankly, that's what seemingly has happened to Dr. Bob Jacobs, who is the co-author with Robert Hastings of the book confession. Dr. Bob Jacobs had his first encounter with UFO intelligence in a rather straightforward manner that became known as the 1964 Vandenberg Air Force UFO incident, or the 1964 Big Sur UFO incident. He was the commanding officer of telescopic instrumentation charged with filming ICBM test launches so that that film could be used by engineers to further the technology. In this particular incident, he was on a hilltop outside of the town of Big Sur, and as he was filming the test launch, when the missile got within proximity to the fringe of space and the warhead was released, a flying saucer-shaped vehicle entered the frame and emitted 4 beams of light at the warhead, and the dummy warhead tumbled to the ground, completely out of commission. He was later called by his commanding officer to discuss the incident, and accompanying him and his commanding officer were 2 CIA officers that subsequently confiscated the spectacular film. Anyways, as Robert Hastings writes in the book Confession, Bob is now convinced that the paranormal encounters he had later in life were directly related to that event, Vandenberg, 1964, and perhaps meant to serve as an ongoing corroboration of its importance. Here is a truly amazing story found in the book Confession. It was 2012, and Robert Hastings was interviewing several Air Force veterans, I believe, regarding their experiences of UAP incursions into nuclear facilities. Dr. Bob Jacobs is there because he agreed to film these interviews. After the final interview, Dr. Bob Jacobs leads Robert Hastings into his office because Robert Hastings wanted to tell him something important. When he gets into the office, he opens up to Dr. Bob Jacobs and says, "Look, I want to be honest with you. I have been commandeered by non-human intelligence. And every time this occurs, I wake up in my bed at 4:40 a.m. To which Dr. Bob Jacobs responds, when it happens to me and I have these commandeering experience nightmares, I wake up at 3:33 a.m. every single time, without exception." Now, this is interesting because they've both known each other since 1986 and have never shared any of this information. So in the course of this discussion, for the first time, they both revealed to each other that they have contact experience. Now, granted, Dr. Bob Jacobs' contact experience, as far as I understand, up until this point, really exclusively or primarily encompasses nightmares that encompass reoccurring dreams of being commandeered by non-human intelligence. And one of the reoccurring themes in the dream is that he is shown or given a demonstration of sorts of unknown technology. But Robert Hastings' experiences can be differentiated because in addition to these kind of nightmares and waking up at 4:40 a.m., he also has, up until that point, has had much more tangible experiences of being commandeered and being snatched, shall we say, by non-human intelligence. But what's really interesting about this story is after they have this conversation, hours later, because I guess they had the conversation late in the evening, hours later, Dr. Bob Jacobs wakes up at 3:33 a.m., like all the other times, from a very scary nightmare where he was commandeered by non-human intelligence, just like he's experienced many times over in the past. So he's frightened, he collects himself, he gets out of bed, and he starts walking to the restroom. As he's walking to the restroom, he looks out the window in his hallway and he sees a very small yellow orb lighting up the ground underneath it. And after taking the weirdness of that all in, he doesn't remember anything beyond that. He doesn't even remember going back to his bed. Very interesting, very coincidental, shall we say. Here, Robert Hastings sums it all up beautifully in the book Confession. So after having his commandeering nightmares for some 30 years without much variation, an unexpected post-awakening event had suddenly materialized. Only hours after Bob and I discussed our experiences together, I have concluded, correctly or not, that the intelligence underlying all of this was somehow aware of our conversation in his office, and for whatever reason, had decided to up the ante, so to speak. Bob had voiced doubts about alien commandeerings being the cause of his nightmares. Even though he knew with certainty that something weird has been going on, the thought of non-human entities being involved was at that time too daunting an idea for him to contemplate. Regardless, if those beings had somehow overheard our conversation, say via telepathy, perhaps they had decided to make a point so that the actual nature of Bob's experiences would be clear to him. Nightmares are one thing. A glowing sphere hovering over your yard is quite another. But I'm obviously just speculating. There are two important factors to take away from this story from my perspective. For one, you may think twice before going out into the field under the stars or under the sun and extending a gesture of wanting to make contact and be in communication with UFO intelligence, when potentially UFO intelligence is so sophisticated that it has the capability of knowing what you think, knowing what you say, being able to monitor that, and knowing where you are on Earth at any given moment. You may not want to volunteer yourself to be on the radar, so to speak, of such sophisticated intelligence. That's number one. Number two is, with Dr. Bob Jacobs, prior to his experience with UFO intelligence, when he was the commander of telescopic instrumentation and he filmed a UAP, prior to that, he had zero, as far as he can tell, zero interactions with the paranormal, zero interactions with UFO intelligence. After that, then he started having frequent contact and experience with UFO intelligence and the paranormal. So what's suggestive here, at the very minimum, is that if you go out of your way to begin communication and interaction and experience with this UFO intelligence, it could lead, at least in theory, to undesirable, unsolicited contact, such as what Dr. Bob Jacobs has experienced. And this is not only with Dr. Bob Jacobs. Travis Walton has had the exact same kind of situation. We all know that he was commandeered and snatched, so to speak, in 1975 in the Sitz-Greaves National Forest in Arizona. Which is much less known is that in 2014, after he did a speech at Burbank MUFON and he was driving away from the facility, at one point he saw 3 lights approaching. At first he didn't think too much of it, but as it got closer and closer, he recognized that it was anomalous. And then ultimately, he recognized that it was a giant triangle with lights on each corner of the triangle. He wasn't alone. He was with his son and someone else. And eventually, he reports that the triangle literally stopped right on top of his car. It could have stopped in a million different places. It stopped right on top of his car. And then after that, it rotated toward the Pacific Ocean and then shot off out into the Pacific. Now, Travis Walton contends that they knew it was him from the Sitz-Greaves National Forest commandeering of himself, and where he went on to an actual machine, UAP, whatever you want to call it. He thinks that it's the same intelligence that snuck up on him, so to speak, in 2014. So at least in theory, by exposing yourself to UFO intelligence once, it could lead to other exposure. You may or may not desire. Just to be crystal clear, I have never heard Travis Walton ever say that his contact experiences post 1975 have been stressful or even undesirable, in contrast to Bob Jacobs and Robert Hastings have said that about the nature of their contact experiences. Travis Walton has stated regarding the giant black triangle that flew to his car and stopped over his car. He said that the only reason he shared that experience is because it wasn't just two witnesses, that being his son and the other person in the car with him, that it was actually witnessed by a dozen other people, and that it was recorded in some website where people record sightings. So that was the only reason that he felt comfortable talking publicly about that contact experiences. But I have heard that Travis Walton has had other contact experiences, but since it cannot be corroborated, he will not share it because he doesn't want to, this is my understanding, he doesn't want to compromise or make people doubt his initial experience in 1975 by reporting other experiences that he has had. Interestingly, Tom DeLonge was once asked about CE-5 practice. It was on a Jimmy Church episode, and Jimmy Church was telling Tom DeLonge that a couple months ago he was at Contact in the desert, and he had an experience with UFO Intelligence, and he wanted to get Tom DeLonge's take regarding that kind of situation. And here's what Tom DeLonge had to say regarding Jimmy Church's experience. No, let me tell you, it's playing with you, okay? And that's not a good thing. But everyone there wants to see one so bad that it's going to perform for you. And you don't want to be doing that. And I'm not saying all life out there is bad. I'm saying it's people just don't understand. And that's why it's time that people understand. And the whole, there isn't only one type of UFO either. It's like you can't sum it all up and say there's only one type of human being. But what you don't want to have happen. At that point, Tom DeLonge changes his train of thought and begins talking about his cargo cult thesis that asserts that UFO intelligence is responsible for creating religions designed to create strife in our world. At this point, my mind-reading capabilities are revealing to me that there are a few people in the audience right now that are starting to get upset because I'm not talking about all the beautiful experiences that CE-5 and Contact have provided for many, many people over decades and maybe hundreds, thousands of years, etc. You really should not be asking me that simply because that's not the subject matter of this video. The subject matter of this video is what are the potential dangers or risks, even just theoretical, of doing CE-5. So I hope we were clear on that. I asked an expert at CE-5 who has not only been involved in making contact with UFO intelligence for many, many, many years, but he also knows a large number of people who have done the same as him. And my question for him, and his name is James Ian Doley, he runs the YouTube channel Engaging the Phenomenon, highly recommend it. It's a great YouTube channel. I asked him, I said, James, with all your years of experience in CE-5, according to your expertise, are there any risks involved in doing CE-5 and unintended consequences that could occur from doing CE-5 in the short term as well as the long term? And this is what he had to say.
In regards to the question of is CE-5 safe and may it have either short-term or long-term unintended consequences, I would say, number one, yes, CE-5 is safe. And I'm saying this based on my years of experience in the field and working with many, many people who have been both involved in short-term CE-5 and long-term CE-5. Now, on the long-term, maybe one of the unintended consequences may be that you are likely to be more peaceful, more relaxed, and it is very mind expanding. So, and that's given the fact that if you're practicing meditation, which we usually do in CE-5, long-term meditation practice has many benefits. And the idea of connecting and interacting with another intelligence is very mind-expanding in many ways and will open your mind likely to the greater reality. But as far as negative results from short-term or long-term CE-5, I find that 99% of the people practicing CE-5 usually have a positive outlook on it and don't generally ever really report any kind of negative encounters due to CE-5 or in general. So thanks for listening.
As it stands now, I really haven't studied much CE-5, and I've only heard of one situation that occurred seemingly from CE-5 that I would consider very undesirable. And I heard it from Dr. Joseph Birx. He stated that in 1993, the missing time phenomenon swept the CE-5 network in the western United States among 3 different cities: Denver, Phoenix, and Los Angeles. And this happened over the span of a month. Now, he is adamant that no ill effects occurred from various people doing contact work in these 3 cities experiencing missing time. However, my feelings on this would be, do you really want to experience missing time? And what would be the purpose of that missing time? Not really a territory I would choose to experience from my sensibilities personally. It's incumbent for me to make a distinction between the contact experiences I described with Dr. Bob Jacobs and Travis Walton and the type of contact experiences people have with CE-5. One of the scenarios that I insinuated by citing Dr. Bob Jacobs and Travis Walton is that if you have an experience where you have an intersection with the phenomena, a random, unintentional intersection with the phenomena, it could lead to further interactions down the line that may be unsolicited or undesirable. But here's a big distinction that you really must keep in mind. The circumstances for which Dr. Bob Jacobs and Travis Walton had encounters with the phenomena was not initiated, was not intentional. In other words, they did not wake up one morning and say, I'm going to intend to have contact. Contact, frankly, came to them. Whereas with CE-5, it is intentional. It is human-initiated contact with non-human intelligence. So there is that possibility that CE-5 simply is not prone to eliciting further contact down the line that may be either undesirable and or unsolicited, while intersections with the phenomena that were unplanned may be more conducive to leading to further contact down the line that's undesirable. So we need to make that distinction. The second distinction we should make, or potential distinction, because there's no way to know for sure, is that the entities, for lack of a better way of putting it, that are attracted through CE-5, through human-initiated contact, may be a different, for lack of a better way of putting it, a different species or species from those entities that people experience when the contact is uninitiated, when the contact is a random intersection with the phenomena. Interestingly, even Chris Mellon, in his recent article titled Potential Sources of Information Regarding Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon, acknowledges that there could be various actors from whether one species or multiple species that are interacting with our planet. He writes, are different kinds or types of vehicles associated with different locations, time frames, or types of targets? If so, are we possibly dealing with multiple, potentially even competing actors? I'm going to end this video with a quick discussion on something I said very recently on Twitter. I totally get and appreciate people being skeptical of paranormal activity occurring in the Uinta Basin. Being a card-carrying cynic, I suspect I'd also struggle with this proposition had I not had my own completely unambiguous paranormal experience. Exo-Academian responds. And that's what so much of this comes down to, personal experience. A push for disclosure may well move in lockstep with the numbers of people who've had their own personal experiences that defy conventional prosaic explanation. Now, I don't know if CE-5 works. How would I know? Never even tried it. Do I think it works? Yes, I do. The reason I think it works is because I don't think it's outlandish that if there are vehicles flying around in our atmosphere and in our oceans that militaries around the world are aware of and can't account for, the U.S. government has assessed, in my opinion, even though that hasn't been made public yet, but it eventually will. They have assessed that there is a presence, such as with the Tic Tac. That's not the Chinese, that's not the Russians, and that's not Elon Musk. So if it's none of those things, then it must be something else. And that something else has much better and more sophisticated capabilities than anything any terrestrial source has. Consequently, the idea that someone could go out into the field, intend to make contact utilizing various methods, and this intelligence could detect that and as a result display itself in some way, shape, or fashion is simply not outlandish. And it's very sad and unfortunate that as soon as you begin talking about CE-5, now you've become more fringe than just UFOs. Well, I got news for you. UFOs is like a gateway to fringe, frankly. UFOs is sort of the ground zero of strange and unexplained. And once you start acknowledging that there are exotic vehicles that exist, that with technology potentially hundreds, if not thousands of years ahead of us, then I don't know what to tell you. The fact of the matter is, everything's on the table. So you can't just say, well, I believe in UFOs, man. I believe the vehicles are out there, but CE-5 is a bunch of BS. Like, how do you justify that argument? UFOs are sophisticated technology, well beyond anything we have. You think it's a big deal if they'd be capable of somehow utilizing advanced technology that can detect when people are trying to make contact and then respond to that intention people invest out in the field? Come on. In line with Exo-Academian's insight, I do think that CE-5 could play an important role in the disclosure process, which, in my opinion, is going to continue to escalate simply because the root of disclosure is scientific data. This isn't fantasy. The root of disclosure is scientific data. It's forensic evidence that paints a very compelling picture that we are not alone. And as that sort of meanders, maybe slowly and in various ways, as that meanders into the collective consciousness of humanity, it's going to only escalate, and it has to escalate because you cannot perpetually keep something of this weight under wraps. It's not even a possibility. And we're seeing that right now. It's unraveling right before our eyes right now, and it will continue, and you can mark my words. But anyways, so how do we learn about the phenomena? And as this disclosure process escalates and more people become persuaded based on evidence that comes out, based on expert witness testimony that comes out, based on politicians that are getting briefed on classified material that demonstrates beyond next generation technology is in our airspace and acting with impunity. As all this unravels, more and more people will become persuaded that, quite simply put, we are not alone in the universe. And so this is going to obviously increase the curiosity of people everywhere. And they're going to be like, okay, we're not alone. Great. How do I learn more about the intelligence behind these vehicles or whatever they are? And there are only so many approaches that I know of offhand that you can do this. You can read about sightings, and that's a very valid way to learn more about the phenomena and the intelligence behind it. You can read about more intimate encounters, Rua, Zimbabwe aerial school, 1990s comes to mind. I think it was 94 when a saucer-shaped vehicle landed within proximity to the school, was witnessed by over 60 children, was witnessed by some of the teachers, and one of the teachers is actually going to come forward pretty soon in the upcoming documentary by James Fox called The Phenomenon. But it's a highly corroborated case. So, and this would characterize a more intimate contact experience beyond just seeing something in the sky. These children actually go on record stating that they received a telepathic message from the entities that were actually came out of the vehicle. And the message was, you got to take care of the environment, as cliche as that may sound. So you have sightings, you can read about sightings, you can read about more intimate contact experiences where perhaps telepathy took place. But then there is option C, which is CE-5, human-initiated contact with non-human UFO intelligence. And of course people are going to try that. Of course people are going to give it a whirl because they're going to be curious about what they can discover about the phenomena utilizing this technique. And therefore, it may play an important role with the disclosure process as more and more people engage in this practice, assuming it works. I don't know if it works. Maybe someday I'll find out. If you think I should give CE-5 a serious practice, let me know in the comments section below. If you think I should not do CE-5 because of the potential or theoretical risks involved in doing CE-5, let me know in the comments section below. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. If you'd like to support this channel, you can check out my merch shop where I sell t-shirts, links in the description below, or you can even become a patron. Or you can just slap a like on this bad boy, and I'll appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.